back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hey guys, I'm here today to do 5 more cuts from my SPFBO batch this year. I'm working my way through 30 books for the self-published fantasy blog off to choose one finalist, which I put forward and have 9 other blogs read and review, and I'll also read their finalists, and we will eventually have an overall winner. However, unfortunately, the books that I'm going to talk about today are going to be cut because they were not as strong as some of the others that I have since read. However, I don't think that's to say that you shouldn't read some of them. Some of them might be much more your thing than they are mine, and I'll tell you a little bit about each of them to hopefully get you to pick them up if they do sound like your thing. So let's get started. The first one that I'm going to talk about is called The Girl Drank Poison by Keith Blandman. I'm really sad to say that this one didn't work at all for me, and I really found it a struggle to get through this. I did actually finish this book, however, I don't know that I should have, because I definitely knew early on this maybe wasn't going to be for me. It didn't work well for me, and I was pretty baffled and confused by the choices that the author made. I kept wanting the story to make sense, and it kind of never did. So the characters and their general roles, and what on earth the thought process was behind this book, I couldn't tell you. However, the story, as much as I could work out, is centred on a girl who drinks an out-of-date love potion, unbeknownst to her, and then she turns into this big beast, essentially, who goes on the rampage. You also have a ferelf, who is kind of like this ferret with magic, and this creature is planning to hunt down the monster girl. They refer to themselves as we in a strange way. This ferelf is like referring to themselves as we, which really annoyed me. That's a personal pet peeve, I suppose. I don't like it when someone is like, we are going to do this and we do that. It really bugs me. So that was a pet peeve. So I instantly didn't like that character. And then finally we have Horace, who is the shop owner, and Degray, who is the man who was dumb enough to give the girl that he really loved a love potion, which was out of date and caused all the trouble. Honestly, the plot of this one was messy, to say the least. It jumps around a lot from character to character, their past and their present and their current plot points. I often find that multiple POV works really well for me. In this book, it definitely didn't. And the only character who I actually was kind of feeling sorry for or feeling anything for was the monster, who barely gets a look in the whole story. All the characters that we do follow, I didn't like. Overall, the pacing is choppy, it's pretty brief in places where I'd have liked to see more, such as the development of the characters in the world. We really don't get a lot of that. The magic is fairly unexplained throughout, both the potion and the magic itself and the powers of the world. The story felt like it just doesn't have a destination in mind, it's just kind of weaving around, and it took some really odd twists to get to where it ended up, and I definitely felt like it ended on a kind of unresolved note as well. I don't think this is the sort of book that will work for everyone. In fact, I feel like this is a pretty niche title. However, I have heard that some of the other books by this author might be worth a try from people who have read their other titles. So maybe this is not a good one to start on with this author. It might only be worth reading if you're already a fan of their work and kind of know what to expect. I feel like I get the impression this is a bit of an experimental book by the author. If it's not, then I apologise, but it feels very experimental. It feels like they're trying to do something different, and that just didn't pay off for me. I'd be curious to anyone who has read it what you thought, but I ended up giving it a 1.5 out of 5, which is 3 out of 10. Not a great score from me. I don't usually give out such low scores, so yeah, the fact that I finished it is a plus, but I couldn't tell you too much about it or what the reasoning behind it was. I definitely don't feel compelled to pick up more by the author, unfortunately, but maybe it's going to be something that you guys really enjoy. I'd love to have your thoughts if you have read it. The next one I actually DNF'd. I didn't finish it. I got to 43% of the way through and I just found that I was really struggling with this. I have a weird thing in my batch of books where I tend to have quite a lot of fae stories apparently, and this is one of them. I actually love the cover for this. I think it's stunning. I didn't like the book very much. I found it quite confusing. There's a lot of potential here because there is a mashup between magic and technology, and that's right at the forefront of the plot, but I felt like that never quite paid off. I felt like instead of complementing one another, these two disciplines were clashing against one another, and there was quite a lot of exposition, probably too much for my own personal liking. It focuses on Princess Aurora, which is definitely inspired by the tale of Sleeping Beauty, definitely influenced by Scotland and Wales and Ireland and the folklore and mythology of these places. You can certainly see influences of those in this book. I think it's kind of supposed to be this reimagining of Sleeping Beauty with these influences tied in and then a technological twist. I didn't feel like it quite worked. It seems like the princess has been conditioned to believe certain things must be done for the realm not to fall apart. She's kidnapped by a rival group of people who tell her that the real world is very different from what she's been taught, but she is pretty much baffled by these explanations and just can't wrap her head around it. As mentioned, the writing is one of the things that really didn't work for me in this particular book. Personally, I found it all a little bit too disorganised and a little bit too rushed around. I didn't feel like I was really getting to know the character or understand her and why she had been brought up in the way she had. I felt like there was just a lot of rushing about and not a lot of real moments of clarification for the reader. She felt a little bit brainwashed and robotic to me as a main character, and I didn't like reading about her or her point of view, and I found it a difficult one. So I did end up DNFing this, as I say, at 40%. I haven't rated it therefore, but I know it wasn't going to be one of my finalists or semi-finalists, so unfortunately I didn't enjoy it. If you do like things like twists on fairy tales, maybe it will be more your thing than it was for me. Next up, another one which unfortunately is not going any further, but which I did enjoy. This is Latch, and it is by Anila Dean. I was pleasantly surprised with this book. I like the cover. It's an urban fantasy which has elements of humour and sass. We follow a man called Sam, who is himself a locksmith. However, he is not only a great locksmith, he also has magical ability to be able to open up any lock no matter what. He lives in a very small town where pretty much nothing happens, so he just does odd jobs here and there, until one day a new client appears and asks him to open something very different to his usual kind of clientele. This client is Death, and this whole thing started getting pretty interesting from that point onwards. We start to see magical and mythical people becoming part of the story in quite a big way, and I liked it. I really enjoyed Death/Alice's character. I think she was quite cool to be as a main part of the story. It reminded me a little bit of Death from Terry Pratchett's series, which I like. The two of them, Sam and Alice, kind of bounce off of one another really well and play to each other's strengths, I think, developing the character a little bit and their banter. However, they do have some terrible lines occasionally, which are supposed to be funny and just make you want to roll your eyes. I think my biggest criticism of this one was just the pacing and the shifting characters. I felt like there were a few different parts to the book which maybe didn't flow super seamlessly together. There's a lot of good ideas, but I didn't love the shift from Sam to Alice. In the last section, I felt like most of the book is Sam, and then we have this random shift into Alice, which I didn't feel like was a natural progression. I felt like it felt a bit forced and a bit stuttered at the end. It almost felt like an entirely different story, and I think it needed a little bit more cohesion from one point to the other, because I just felt like it was almost starting a new short story in itself. In the end, it's a fun book. It has a lot of cute ideas, a lot of interesting moments, and the characters are fun, but I think again they're a fairly surface level character. They don't feel super insightful, and I would have liked to see a bit more of a seamless transition between the stories and also a bit more characterization in general. So I gave that one a 3 out of 5, which is a 6 out of 10 for SPFBO. The next one on my list is By Sea and Sky, which is by Antoine Bandel. This one I actually enjoyed. I audiobooked this one, so I definitely recommend the audio if you guys are thinking of picking this one up. It's a good pirate romp, which is always fun, and in fact this one has pirates but also skyships are a big feature of this story as well. It's heavily inspired by the West Indies and pirate lifestyles in general. A writer writing their experience in a way, and I enjoyed that much more diverse cast than I normally see in fantasy. Our main characters have actually been forced into a life of piracy. It's not something they really chose for themselves, it's kind of something they've had to go into because of their situation, which you learn a little bit more about as you go on. It follows Zala and her husband, who are two separate characters with different viewpoints. The main one is Zala herself. They're a good pair and they've been travelling together a long time, trying to make enough money to buy the potion that keeps the illness that Zala's husband has down. This disease is really bad and the only thing that can control it is the potion. It's the root of their plot and it's kind of the main reason that they're into pirating, because that makes a lot more money than traditional trades. Zala's the main POV and the easiest one to connect to, because she is trying to find her husband for the majority of the book after they have been separated. I enjoyed her plot. She's pretty quick-witted and easy to like and get along with as a main character. She's a bit brusque at times, but I think that kind of comes with the territory of being on a pirate ship and dealing with piracy. The magic of the world is pretty varied. There are people who are turning into stone, winged creatures who can fly and kind of transform. And there's a lot of other things that are hinted at here and there as you go through the story as well. I definitely wish there'd been a little more characterization. This is a common complaint for me, but it's something I do wish there had been more of, especially with Zala. I feel like we get the sort of beginning levels of her, but I would have loved to dig really deep and just find out more and more about her and what kind of drew them into this lifestyle besides the potion. And you know, a little bit more detail could have definitely happened with her character. However, with that being said, there is a lot of action, a lot of battles, a lot of kind of piracy moments, you know, stereotypical piracy moments in this book where they're fighting and they're, you know, fighting physically but also fighting verbally with one another. There's a sense of us and them between the Empire and the pirates, and there's kind of a big overarching story of whether the Empire can control the pirates. The reader is kind of firmly on the side of the pirates. The Empire brings out even a new creation to try and stop the pirates, but you're kind of rooting for them because of the story of Zala and her husband. Overall, I enjoyed it. It's a really fun adventure story. It definitely harks back to history of the West Indies a lot more than I expected, which is really cool and just draws a lot of influence off of those times. I also like that it really clearly states that it's diverse and the characters are quite different to those that I normally read in fantasy, and they're pirates and they're having a rollicking good time a lot of the time whilst they're fighting and swearing and being silly. So I really enjoyed all of those elements. I just wanted a little bit more kind of depth to it, but I enjoyed it overall and I gave it a 3.5, which is 7 out of 10 overall. So the final one that I'm going to talk about in this review is called Lady Thy Name is Trouble, which is by Laurie L. McLaughlin. This one I enjoyed as well. It's a kind of spin on sword and sorcery, because instead of following male characters, which is what you typically see in sword and sorcery, this follows two females who are sisters and they are pretty badass. I loved the fact that at no point in the book are they ever compared to men, and they are just awesome in their own right and everyone just respects them for who they are. Doesn't matter what gender they are. That was really cool. They're a travelling mercenary duo and they are fighters, but they also have intelligence, which is a really nice thing to see. They've travelled over the realm together and they're pretty much inseparable sisters. However, although they seem that way at first, we kind of learn as we go through that there's a little bit more going on, and actually their paths maybe are not going to stay aligned for much longer because of various things in their futures. It starts with the invasion of a kingdom where the two sisters are. They happen to be there and they're kind of been staying there because one of the sisters has a bit of a love interest who is actually a prince in the kingdom, and so they happen to be there when this invasion begins, and they manage to get the prince out of the kingdom along with his cousin and quickly, swiftly get them away from the area and away from the butcher, who is this hired hunter, essentially, who is trying to find the prince and kill him so that the empire is conquered. The plot moves very quickly and they are forced to flee very, very quickly and find allies in pubs and along the way. What I like best is that even though it felt quick, it also felt like there were some downtime moments where you did get to know the characters a bit more, and I liked seeing the sisters in particular and their passions and motivations. They each have their own troubles and their own secrets, which you do learn a little more about as the book goes, and I like that they weren't just swords. They actually have a personality behind that and a little bit more of a backstory to them, which you slowly uncover. I think they actually reminded me a little bit of Hadrian and Royce from Michael J. Sullivan's Sword and Sorcery series. So if you've read that and you enjoy that style, I do think this is kind of a female version of that. So I'd definitely say if you like one, you'll probably like the other. And I enjoyed this. I think my only quibbles for this story really came from the plot direction, and I felt like some of the sections that we kind of go off into could have been explored a little bit further. It felt like there were a couple different threads that didn't go as far as I wanted. But with that being said, it was a solid read and I enjoyed it, and it was generally a good one as well, which kept me reading quite quickly and fast paced. So I gave it a 3.5, which is 7 out of 10 for SPFBO, and I definitely think a lot of you guys would like this one as well. However, as I've said, none of these will be continuing on. I am cutting them because I have found books that I enjoy more and that I think are better. But that doesn't mean I don't like these books. I have enjoyed reading them, and I want to thank all the authors for submitting their books to the competition. It's always a joy to read new authors and experience new books by them. So do let me know if any of these books have kind of piqued your interest and whether you'll be picking any of them up. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you very soon in another video. Bye guys!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.